Dr. Case, I should be asking you a few questions about one topic only on behalf of the long COVID groups. You were part of a WhatsApp group, including the then Prime Minister. On the 17th of May 2020, he shared an article about people suffering from the prolonged symptoms of COVID-19, and I would wonder if we can please call up 2087. Yeah, 102087.
Yeah. I think that's come up.
Thank you. As a direct result of this article, was any advice sought on the prolonged symptoms of COVID-19?
I'm afraid I can't remember whether this particular interaction sparked advice. I remember, I think it's probably later in 2020, probably into the late summer, maybe the autumn, when I think it was Chris Whitty started to talk about long COVID in the meetings with the Prime Minister. But I'm afraid I can't, I mean, I'm happy to check. I don't know whether it's possible to check and come back. I don't know whether that route's available, but I can't tell you I know for sure.
Yes, I think that is, you're right to recall that, but that is much later in time. The Cabinet Office received advice from the DHSC on the 25th of June 2020. We don't need to call it up, but it's 69853, that there could well be a number of longer-term health impacts of COVID-19. You describe the role of the COVID task force, and for reference, it's paragraph 3.10 of your corporate statement. We don't need to go to it. As ensuring the government received the most up-to-date advice on the state of play on the ground, was guided by the science, and these words I emphasise, continued to adopt a holistic approach to decision-making to ensure that the impact of all decisions was assessed in the round. That's what you said. Can you assist, please, then, as to why it took not until April 2021 for the CTF to prepare advice for Cabinet Office on the long-term effects of COVID-19?
So if I remember correctly, in the autumn of 2020, what I remember is sort of, as I say, Chris Whitty talking to the Prime Minister, with the COVID task force people in the room, about the possibilities of there, being long-term effects of COVID. I can't tell you precisely why that piece of advice came at that particular time. I can't remember quite what the moment was, but I can tell you that advice was coming straight from. I mean, probably advice is strong. Sort of commentary about the development of the understanding of long COVID, as we later called it, was coming from Chris directly to the Prime Minister.
Yes, that is later in time, but you accept that's a 10-month delay, and I'm just particularly going to ask you about a parliamentary paper on short and long-term effects of COVID-19, which was published in early September 2020. That's 23854, we don't need to go to it. Yeah. Can you assist as to why couldn't the COVID task force prepare something similar at that time?
I don't. The direct answer is I don't know. I don't know who sort of saw it and what was done with the parliamentary advice. What I recall, I think I recall this, as I think it was Patrick, in and around that late summer, early autumn time. Actually, it was a little bit, I think, alongside the discussions around segmentation that Mr. Keith was asking me about earlier, was this idea that it was just fine for children to get COVID because they bounced through it. I seem to remember Patrick being clear that it wasn't that straightforward, and that, in fact, the impact there could well be lasting impacts of COVID. I can't tell you what precisely was done. I'm happy to check on that parliamentary report and who saw it.
Yes. Well, I simply want to just ask you whether, in principle, the COVID task force could, I suggest, prepared something similar.
Yeah.
So help me then with this. How could Cabinet Office factor long COVID into decisions around NPIs, including the imposition of the later lockdowns, if they were not provided with either timely advice or data on it?
I think, if I remember correctly, in the papers that were coming to COVID-S and COVID-O around the decisions around the second lockdown, there were discussions or references in that to the long-term impact of COVID. So I think it was discussed. I'm not going to pretend I think it was discussed in detail. I think it was much more in 2021. But if I'm remembering correctly, I think it's in the papers of COVID-S, COVID-O. Apologies if I've misremembered.
Greatest respect, I'm not sure you are right.
Okay, sorry, apologies.
Well, do you agree in principle
Yes.
that it's necessary, if you're going to factor in long COVID into decisions around NPIs, to have timely advice and data?
Yes.
Thank you. And I'm going to suggest to you finally that, simply put, was it that Cabinet Office did not take into account that a significant number of people would suffer long-term effects of COVID-19 when carrying out that balancing exercise required to make a decision to lockdown?
I think that's true to an extent in relation to the 2020 period. I think in 2021 it factored more in the decision taking.
Yes, I think.
But of course, that's unlocking though.
The second and third lockdowns. So you agree with me on that?
Yeah.
Thank you very much indeed.